Okay, for this reading, we're going to start on page 162. I go to the district commandment to report myself. Slowly I wander through the streets. Occasionally someone speaks to me. I do not delay long, for I have little inclination to talk. On my way back from the barracks, a loud voice calls out to me. Still lost in thought, I turn around and find myself confronted by a major. "Can't you salute?" he blusters. "Sorry, Major," I say in embarrassment. "I didn't notice you." "Don't you know how to properly speak?" he roars. I would like to hit him in the face, but control myself, for my leave depends on it. I click my heels and say, "I did not see you, Herr Major." "Then keep your eyes open," he snorts. "What is your name?" I give it. His fat red face is furious. "What regiment?" I give him full particulars. Even yet, he has not had enough. "Where are you quartered?" But I have had more than enough to say. "Between Langbark and Biscuit." He asked, a bit stupefied. I explained to him that I arrived on leave only an hour or two since, thinking that he would then trot along. But not at all. He gets even more furious. "You think you can bring your frontline manners here? What? Well, you don't stand for that sort. We don't stand for that sort of thing. Thank God we have discipline here." 20 paces backwards. Double march, he commands. I am mad with rage, but I cannot say anything to him. He could put me under arrest if he liked. So I double back and then march up to him. 6 paces from him, I spring to a stiff salute and maintain it until I am 6 paces beyond him. He calls me back again and affably gives me to understand that for once he is pleased to put mercy before justice. I pretend to be duly grateful. "Now dismiss," he says. I turn about smartly and march off. So in this part, Paul, we know he has just come home. So after he has unpacked, he has to go report to his base. As he is returning, there is a major, so a higher-ranking military official, who sees him. And Paul does not salute him as they walk past each other. So the major then calls him out on it. And Paul is, just says, "Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't notice you." And because of that, the major will make him march because he is supposed to command and follow an officer, which then infuriates Paul. So we continue. That ruins the evening for me. I go back home and throw my uniform in a corner. I had intended to change it in any case. Then I take out my civilian clothes from the wardrobe and put them on. So he's talking about I put on my normal clothes that I wore in everyday life. I feel awkward. The suit is rather tight and short. I have grown in the army. Collar and tie give me some trouble. In the end, my sister ties the bow for me. But how light the suit is. It feels as though I had nothing on but a shirt and underpants. So he's talking about in this part, he's changing into his normal civilian clothes. And he's talking about when he's putting on his shirt and tie, how he feels like he's not wearing anything. In war, he's got his clothing is much heavier, but he's used to carrying more things on him. So he kind of feels different now that he's not wearing his uniform. I look at myself in the glass. It is a strange sight. A sunburnt, overgrown candidate for confirmation gazes at me in astonishment. My mother is pleased to see me wearing civilian clothes. It makes me less strange to her. But my father would rather I keep my uniform on so that he could go and take me to visit his acquaintances, but I refuse. So Dad, in a sense, kind of wants him to wear his uniform to kind of show him off. It is pleasant to sit quietly somewhere in the beer garden, for example, under the chestnuts by the skittle alley. The leaves fall down on the table and on the ground, only a few, the first. A glass of beer stands in front of me. I've learned to drink in the army. The glass is half empty, but there are a few good swigs ahead of me. And besides, I can always order a second and a third if I wish to. There are no bugles and no bombardments. The children of the house play in the skittle alley, and the dog rests his head against my knee. The sky is blue. Between the leaves of the chestnuts rises the green spire of St. Margaret's Church. This is good. I like it, but I cannot get on with the people. My mother is the only one who asks no questions. So Paul is, going out into town, and he's talking about how, he's not used to this type of environment. He's, used to the bombs and being in trenches, and he's not used to, probably some more peace and quiet. He's not used to seeing a dog lay there and rest. He's not used to children playing. And then he talks about how when he says, I cannot get on with these people, he's saying these, you'll see here shortly how, his mother is the only one who won't ask questions, but his father wants to ask all these questions, and you'll see how he feels about that. He wants me to tell him about the front. He is curious in a way that I find stupid and distressing. I no longer have any real contact with him. There is nothing he likes more than just hearing about it. I realize he does not know when a man cannot talk of such things. I do it willingly, but it is too dangerous for me to put these things into words. I am afraid they might become gigantic, and I be no longer able to master them. What would become of us if everything that happens out there were quite clear to us? So he's saying, Dad is asking me these questions. I don't like to talk about them. And he's saying, my dad does not realize that these are things that cannot be discussed. So I confine myself to telling him a few amusing things, but he wants to know whether I have ever had a hand-to-hand fight. I say no and get up and go out. So Paul is trying to kind of just bring up other little things to distract from that conversation, but Dad keeps asking these very intense and in-depth questions. But that does not mend matters. After I have been startled a couple of times in the street by the screaming of the tram cars, which resembles the shriek of a shell coming straight for one, somebody taps me on the shoulder. It is my German master. So again, you see he's at home and he's struggling to acclimate himself. The noises kind of set him off and kind of scare him because he's thinking he's still at war. It is my German master, and he fastens on me with the usual question. Well, how are things out there? Terrible? Terrible, eh? Yes, it is dreadful, but we must carry on. And after all, you do at least get decent food out there, so I hear. You look well, Paul, and fit. Naturally, it's worse here. Naturally, the best for our soldiers every time, that goes without saying. So Paul is running into a former teacher, and his teacher is talking to him like, oh, well, you look really good and you look healthy. And he's saying, we always send the best supplies and resources to you all, and we are the ones suffering. So he's saying the civilians are the ones suffering at home, when in reality, Paul and all of the former soldiers are all suffering and, barely getting by. So his teacher has a very unrealistic expectation of what war is like. He drags me along to a table with a lot of others. They welcome me. A headmaster shakes hands with me and says, so, you come from the front. What is the spirit out like there? Excellent, eh? Excellent? I explain that no one would be sorry to be back home. He laughs uproariously. Well, I can believe it. But first, you have to give the froggies a good hiding. Do you smoke? Here, try one. Waiter, bring a beer as well for our young warrior. So Paul, after he has run into his former teacher has pulled him into a table, and he's talking to all these men, and they're asking Paul all these questions that he is not telling the truth about. Unfortunately, I have accepted the cigar, so I have to remain. And they are all so dripping with good will that it's impossible to object. All the same, I feel annoyed and smoke like a chimney as hard as I can. In order to make at least some show of appreciation, I toss off the beer in one gulp. Immediately a second is ordered. People know how much they are indebted to the soldiers. They argue about what we ought to annex. The headmaster, with a steel watch chain, comes to have at least the whole of Belgium, the coal areas of France, and a slice of Russia. He produces reasons why we must have them, and is quite inflexible until at last the others give in to him. So when he's at these table with these older men, who have not experienced war, he's talking about what countries Germany should get at the end of war. Then he begins to expound just whereabouts. In France, the breakthrough must come, and turns to me. Now shove ahead a bit out there, and with your everlasting trench warfare, smash through the Johnnies, and then there will be peace. I reply that in our opinion, a breakthrough may not be possible. The enemy may have too many reserves. Besides, the war may be rather different than what people think. So just imagine he's sitting there at a table, and all these older men who probably really don't have that much experience with war are telling Paul what they need to do to win. He dismisses the idea loftily and informs me, I know nothing about it. The details, yes, says he, but this relates to the whole, and of that you are not able to judge. You see only your little sector, and so cannot have any general survey. You do your duty, you risk your life, that deserves the highest honor. Every man of you ought to have the Iron Cross. But first of all, the enemy line must be broken through in Flanders and then rolled up from the top. He blows his nose and wipes his head. Completely rolled up they must be, from the top to the bottom, and then to Paris. So the man is kind of telling him, you don't know what you're talking about. The older man thinks he knows everything and he knows what needs to be done, when in reality, he does not. I would like to know just how he pictures it to himself, and pour the third glass of beer into me. Immediately, he orders another. But break away. He stuffs a few more cigars. But I break away. He stuffs a few more cigars into my pocket and sends me off with a friendly slap. All the best. I hope we will soon hear something worthwhile from you. I imagined leave would be different from this. Indeed, it was different a year ago. It is I, of course, that have changed in the interval. There lies a gulf between the time and today. At that time, I still knew nothing about war. We had only been in the quiet sectors, but now I see that I have been crushed without knowing it. I find I do not belong here anymore. It is a foreign world. Some of these people ask questions. Some ask no questions. But one can see that the latter are proud of themselves for their silence. They often say with their wise air that these things cannot be talked about. They plume themselves on it. So Paul, again, he's realizing even a year ago from where I'm at today, I did not understand what war was going to be like. And he's saying, now I don't belong in my home anymore. He's saying this is a foreign world. I prefer to be alone so that no one troubles me. For they all come back to the same thing, how badly it goes and how well it goes. One thinks it is this way, another that, and yet they are always absorbed in the things that go to make up their existence. Formerly I lived in just the same way myself, but here I feel no contact here. They talk too much for me. They have worries, aims, desires that I cannot comprehend. I often sit with one of them in the little beer garden and try to explain to them that this is really the only thing, just to sit quietly like this. They understand, of course. They agree. They may even feel it so too, but only with words. Only with words. Yes, that is it. They feel it, but always with only half of themselves. The rest of their being is taken up with other things. They are so divided into themselves that none feels it with its whole existence. I cannot even say myself exactly what I mean. So he's talking about these people at home when he says they have worries and aims and desires. And he says, I don't understand that. And he's thinking, their worries and aims and desires are not the same as mine. And then that way, we can't relate in that way as well. When I see them here in their rooms and in their offices about their occupations, I feel an irresistible attraction in it. I would like to be here too and forget the war, but it also repels me. So he's kind of saying in this instance, there are people who are living their normal days and they're living a normal everyday life. And they're going to work and coming home. And Paul is saying, yes, I would love to be able to do that. He goes, I would love to live that life and not have to worry about war. He goes, but that is not where I'm at right now. So he's saying, but it also repels me. So he's saying, he's fighting that idea off because of where he is at. It is so narrow. How can that feel a man's life? He ought to smash it to bits. How can they do it? While out at the front, the splinters are winding over the shell holes, and the star shells go up. The wounded are carried back on waterproof sheets, and comrades crouch in the trenches. They are different men here, men I cannot properly understand, whom I envy and despise. I must think of Kat and Albert and Mueller and Teoden. What will they be doing? No doubt they are sitting in the canteen, or perhaps swimming. Soon they will have to go back up to the front line again.